Welcome to the Mooks and the Gripes podcast. I hope everyone's doing well. This is Trevor, and I am here with Paul. Paul, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, yeah. Glad to see you again, Trevor. And kind of enjoying a rare rainy morning here in Colorado. We've had a lot of hot weather, so it's very welcome.
Yeah, that's how it's been here too, very hot. But for some reason, my grass is green. I haven't even had to turn on the water over the last little while because we got a lot of rain last week and
nice.
through this week. So yeah, it is really nice. So
makes you appreciate it. It's good reading weather.
It is. You don't have to go out and do chores outside in the yard.
Always a good excuse.
What can we do about this? Well, let's all sit down and read together as a family.
Exactly.
I'll read my book. Speaking of which, what have you been reading?
Yeah, so I have been reading a couple of books right now. One of them is one that you actually mentioned earlier, and it's Everything Like Before by, again, I don't know how to pronounce the name, Kjell Askildsen?
That was exactly right, yes.
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah, I'm fluent in Norwegian, as you can tell. So, yeah, no, it's this, as you mentioned before, it's this story collection from Archipelago Books. And as I may have mentioned before, I first saw it in one of their 2021 catalogs and just immediately marked it as one to get. It's beautiful, but on top of that, it just sounds wonderful. From their copy, just a quick description. It says a man and a woman in a quiet, remote house, an old man on a park bench, an estranged brother in a railway cafe. The characters are surrounded by absence, filled with disquiet and longing. They walk to a fjord, they smoke, they drink on a veranda, they listen to conversations that drift through open windows. So, it's kind of a good little description there. I'm absolutely loving it so far. As you can guess from the description, it's not super plot driven. It's a lot of insights into people's lives and relationships. Very strange so far, often kind of unsettling. Kind of leaves you feeling a little disoriented sometimes, which I love all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to focus a lot on disconnection and just kind of damaged and unhappy relationships. But there's also some humor mixed in as well. I don't know, did you ever end up finishing that one, or are you still making your way through it?
I actually haven't picked it up for a little while. I probably have read, 15 to 20 of the stories, so I've got another 15, 20 left.
Yeah. So far, I'm about probably in that same range and really enjoying it so far. And then I'm also just revisiting one of my favorite authors, Willa Cather. In the past, I've read and loved My Antonia, The Professor's House. And so I recently loaned Death Comes for the Archbishop to my aunt. And I got it back after a couple of weeks, and she was just raving about it. And so it kind of inspired me to pick up my own book and start reading it. So, it's set back in the mid-1800s, and it just basically follows this Catholic bishop and his friend. They're sent by the Catholic Church down to New Mexico to kind of attempt to reawaken Catholicism in the region. So, it's as always with Cather, there's lots of beautiful descriptions of nature and landscape. And, there's also these fascinating kind of complicated characters. So, yeah, really enjoying it so far. So those are the two I've been making my way through.
And I love Death Comes for the Archbishop. I haven't read it in probably 20, 25 years, but I used to put that as one of my absolute favorite books and most peaceful books, just one that brings me in a sense of peace. So
yeah,
that's
I can
awesome.
See that. Yeah, I'm loving it. It's long overdue, so I'm happy to finally make my way to it. How about you? What are you reading?
So a couple of things, kind of like you, inspired by our last discussion. I think either that day or maybe it was the next day, I picked up Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn, which is one of his most famous, books, trilogies, kind of got things kicked off for him. And I loved it. I finished it. It's like 1,000 million pages, but I think it's like 650 pages, something around there. I read that thing and finished it pretty fast.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, last week when I was I had a trip into Wyoming of all places. Hello, anyone from Wyoming. I'm always nervous to go through your state because it can snow in the warmest weather.
Mm-hmm.
And make me stuck there. But this time that didn't happen. I instead got a flat tire on I-80 and had to get that fixed. And so I spent another night in Wyoming that I wasn't intending to, but where often a situation like that, I'd be too anxious to actually read. There's just something about this kind of book that I was able to sit down and read that night. And it was really, really nice. A lot of fun. I really liked it. I liked it so much. There's a sequel that's even longer. And I finished Mistborn on like Thursday night this week at 1 a.m, and I had work on Friday. I don't do that very often.
Yeah.
I didn't have like a something that was terrible. I wasn't being irresponsible about work. I knew I could do it and not
Right.
drop any balls. But
you're among friends though, so even if you were, we won't tell.
But the next day I did start the sequel, The Well of Ascension is what it's called, because I'm just enjoying it so much. But the other book that I'm reading currently is Barbara Pym's Excellent Women. Have you read this one?
I
feel
have.
like you probably.
I have. Yeah. I love Barbara Pym, as you probably know, and that one in particular, I thought it was great.
Well, I'm really enjoying it, and I just wanted to maybe read a little bit of a passage here. This passage comes after kind of a pleasant afternoon that our narrator, Mildred, spends. She's a spinster. She's alone, and she does think a lot about what that means for her and for other people around her. Not in a way that this becomes, I don't feel, a book that's all that it's about, and that's all this character is. There's so much more, but it's definitely a part of her. But she's had a pretty good day. She went with a friend who was someone where maybe at one time everyone thought something might happen here, and it didn't. And he's kind of probably not worthy of her anyway, from what we're seeing. And she buys some mimosa that looks lovely, and meanwhile she's got some downstairs neighbors. The husband there is quite nice to her, but it's just not quite everything. And the next morning she gets her mimosas because she accidentally left them down with the neighbor, and it's just not quite as good when the neighbor brings it up. He's disheveled. He's in a dressing gown with his hair ruffled. I felt too embarrassed to look at him and put my hand out through the half-open kitchen door and took the mimosa quickly, putting it in the vase with the twigs and catkins. On the bus, I began thinking that William, that's the potential boyfriend of the past who is no more, but William had been right, and I was annoyed to have to admit it. Mimosa did lose its first freshness too quickly to be worth buying, and I must not allow myself to have feelings, but must only observe the effects of other people's. And there's I don't know, these kinds of books are really powerful and kind of opening up the sadness of other people's lives. And I don't know Barbara Pym very well. I just know that I love her, even though I haven't read a lot of her books, because there's, she has the power to put stuff like that in there. So
yeah, she's amazing. That was a great passage because it captured, she is so good at, like, I know we talk a lot about quiet lives, but she's absolutely focused on those quiet lives. And often there's that melancholy and sadness. She also does have some humor mixed in, but yeah, she's so good at that. She wrote one called A Quartet in Autumn that's about these four older people, and that one's one of my favorites too, and it has that same kind of feeling to it. So yeah,
that's one of those titles, like we talked about in our very first episode, that I've been wanting to read the book for so long, but I'm partially nervous that the book will never be able to do for me what the title does for me.
Yeah.
A Quartet in Autumn. There's just
I know,
like that. Frost in May is the book I'm referring to from our first episode. But yeah, Quartet in Autumn.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's really good. And the nice thing about Barbara Pym is often when you're in those used bookstores and you're scouring the shelves, she's one kind of like Anita Bruckner, where often you can find her. And so over the years, anytime I see one of those, I just pick it up, kind of whether I know anything about that particular title or not. And I just feel like I'm in safe hands with her. So
I'm not sure I have the same experience at the used bookstores here in Utah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I am often surprised what I can find in used bookstores here, but I do look a lot for Barbara Pym and Anita Bruckner, and I've never seen them. It's kind of disheartening,
Well, don't get me wrong. I also am digging through piles of Tom Clancy and, Mitch Albom and everything else. But
yeah. Yep. All right. Well, we today have decided to talk about books, the nonfiction edition. We could do this with, and probably will someday, with books about books that are fictional. There's so many of those that are fun, and where a book or something like that, a book of poetry or a long lost book or something, has its main part in the story, and it's kind of a story about books. This is books about books, nonfiction. I'm curious, Paul, what did you do? We just said that, like we just said books about books, nonfiction. So we probably could take this so many different ways, and I'm curious if we landed on the same little bit of ground to talk about, or if we're going to be talking about really different types of books today. But what did you do to help winnow this down?
No, I was curious about that too, because I had the same thought. I mean, books about books is a very broad topic, and it could be taken in a lot of directions. And like you said, maybe we can have fun with this and do a few different episodes covering different aspects. The way I tend to think about it is often, well, I don't know, actually. I don't even know if I could narrow it down, but a lot of times it's essays. I found a couple of authors over the years who write really good essays about kind of bibliophilia, bibliomania, just the love of books. And then there's also some kind of memoirs that I've come across that are people who have had lives around books.
Yeah.
And so to me, those are kind of two of the categories that immediately pop to mind. And then there's also kind of the Michael Dearda, like, he does a lot of book reviews for the Washington Post, but also he's written some kind of memoir-y type of things that are also very book-centered. So those are the kinds of books I would say that my mind kind of jumps to first when I hear that. But yeah, how about you?
I think we're on the same page.
Yeah.
So, for example, I didn't select biographies of writers because, while that could be part of this, a lot of biographies about writers deal with the writers through their books and are quite wonderful because of that. But I did think about the memoirs, for example. One of my honorable mentions is a memoir that's centered around a book, and I did consider Michael Dearda books because he has so many great essays about just a book or reading a book. But I didn't actually go with any of those kind of compilation of essays for mine, even though I almost did. I went with somewhere, again, books or reading specific books were used to talk about something maybe a little bit bigger.
Okay.
And I'll try to explain that here in a minute.
I'm intrigued.
Well, no, I'm probably overselling that. I don't mean like they taught me, the true meaning of life or anything like that. They were talking about specific books, but had some more maybe critical points in some ways. But books and reading books and their own personal experiences with that are a part with it, except for one. One's just a lark that's about a book. So we'll get to it.
Yeah, sounds good.
Oh, all right. Do you want to give us your first sample, your first pick?
Sure, absolutely. So the first one, I'll jump right in, is Ex Libris, Confessions of a Common Reader by Anne Fadiman. I don't even remember how I came across this, probably with Google looking up something like books about books, to be honest. But yeah, Anne Fadiman, she's the daughter of the renowned, literary radio and television personality Clifton Fadiman, who I think is maybe most famous, at least among bookish circles, for his lifetime reading plan, which kind of laid out this classic plan that you could read throughout your life to kind of make you this well-rounded, well-read person.
Just in time to die.
Yeah, yes, no. Exactly. You finish the last page and that's the end. And then apparently, I didn't know this part, but her mother was also very literary, World War II correspondent and an author herself. So came from a very literary family. And this book, a lot of it touches on that. It's made up of kind of 18 of these personal essays about her life with books. Some of them focus on her as a youth, some of them, later in life. So some of the essay titles, just to give you a little flavor: Marrying Libraries, Never Do That to a Book, The Literary Glutton, Words on a Flyleaf. So just even by, reading through those, it makes me intrigued as a book lover. So, there's one that was about her growing up with her parents and always kind of what we talked about in past episodes, seeing all the books up on the shelves. But she also writes about playing blocks, building castles with her dad's 22-volume set of Trollope. So it's like that idea of not only books as like these literary objects, but just as a part of your life in all different forms, which I really liked. There's another one I really liked about kind of the process of merging libraries with her husband after they're married. And it's funny, but also has some of that kind of like, there's a little bit of like competitiveness, like if they have the same copy of the same book, like who gets to keep theirs and things like that. And then it also kind of talks a little bit about, what happens to her books after she dies. So, it kind of covers the whole gamut. From a review I read about the essay, Never Do That to a Book, they say, she identifies those who revere books physically and are therefore believers in courtly love, and those who underline, make marginal notes, tear pages out, or keep reading books until they fall apart, and are thus believers in carnal love. And it says she allows that the world has room for both. So I like that. I think I err a little bit on the side of courtly love. I tend to not do a whole lot of underlining, but I've been wavering a little bit in recent months where I'm starting to mark up my books a little bit more. So maybe I'll switch over to Carnal Love one of these days. But yeah, so I just was going to read a real quick little snippet here from the one about marrying books or marrying libraries, the one where she's merging with her husband. So she says, our transfer of books across the Mason-Dixon line that separated my northern shelves from his southern ones took about a week. Every night we lined up books on the floor, interlarding mine with his before putting them on the shelves, which meant that for a week we had to hopscotch over hundreds of volumes in order to get from bathroom to kitchen to bedroom. We physically fondled really, every book we owned. Some had inscriptions from old lovers. Some had inscriptions from each other. Some were like time capsules. My major British writers contained a list of poets required for my 1970 12th grade English final, a postcard with a 10-cent stamp dropped out of George's copy of On the Road. As our piles accumulated on the floor, we had several heated debates about not just which books should go together, but where they should go. I had lived in the loft for 9 years before George moved in, and English literature had always occupied the most public spot, the wall facing the front door. George thought American literature deserved this place of honor instead. So anyway, I mean, I'm not going to keep going, but you get a little snippet of just, there's some humor to it, but it's also just that unapologetic passion for books and marrying them together and all that stuff. So I don't know if you've read that one or heard anything about it, but I love it. She has a couple other essay collections that I really enjoy, but this one in particular is my favorite, I think.
I did see, I've seen that book around online. And in fact, when I was making sure that I wasn't completely forgetting something I should put on this list, I did Google books about books and saw that one like at the top of several lists.
Yeah.
But I've never read it. So having it at the top of those lists, I was already intrigued. But yeah, I love that kind of stuff. It's just so fun. I mean, it opens up the door, and have someone who's able to write so well about things that, we all kind of share, but maybe have never thought about the significance of or been able to articulate the significance of. It's so nice. So that's fun. I'm excited about that.
Absolutely. It's a good one. How about you? What's your first one?
So my first one, I'm going to do a book called The Possessed. This is a book by Elif Batuman, and the subtitle is, as many of these books have,
right.
his Adventures with Russian Books and the People Who Read Them. Batuman, I haven't heard too much from her over several years. I used to, follow her on Twitter, and we were Twitter friends. Mm-hmm. We actually, based on this book, one day kind of got into I may have mentioned this before. It's my one brush with literary celebrity with Joyce Carol Oates. She kind of got after us for being too critical of someone using some of the stuff that Batuman talks about in this book, where she talks about the messiness of Russian writers. That many people have the same name, just like in life, and various things like that. And she thought we were maybe a little bit too snide, and came in, and Batuman said, well, if I had the same problem as this author we're criticizing, I'd just laugh my way to the bank,
Right.
kind of thing. But at any rate, this book was a really nice. Again, it's slightly memoirish because she is talking about her own experiences of growing up as a reader of these kinds of books, sometimes latching onto them and other times not, but really digging into them and finally starting to understand some things, not just about herself, but about life. In fact, one of the quotes I would pull is, I didn't care about truth. I cared about beauty. It took me many years. It took the experience of lived time to realize that they really are the same thing. And, she goes through and is talking about Tolstoy and Dostoevsky and Singer and various other authors here. I myself have read some of the highlights of these Russian authors, but I'm not well versed in it by any means. And I really enjoyed her book here, and both because of what it had to say about, this wealth of richness in these books, but also about her own personal experiences. In fact, she really articulates well something we've talked about before, those reading memories. She says, there are certain books that one remembers together with the material circumstances of reading, how long it took, the time of year, the color of the cover, just those kinds of things. And so I really enjoyed this book. I refer back to it quite often because I really resonated with a lot of the things that she has to say about reading and about criticism. It's a book of criticism as well, kind of a well-rounded, a lot of things going on book. So
Yeah.
that's my first one.
No, that's a great one. I actually listened to the audiobook of that a few years ago, and I really enjoyed it too. Have you ever read any of her other stuff? Because she has several other books.
I actually have
Yeah, I
not.
haven't either.
Maybe that's why I haven't heard from her in a while.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
seen her tweeting and stuff. I'm not worthy.
Yeah, she's waiting for the follow up. No, that's a great one. You kind of talking about it made me want to reread it, and it also reminded me of, I think we talked about George Saunders with, his
Yeah.
recent book all about the Russians. So I keep eyeing the Brothers Karamazov, as we've talked about too, and that's one. Just when I read about the Russians, with all of their messiness and everything else that comes with it, I always get inspired, like that it's time to dip back in.
So here's just a slight tangent.
Okay.
And you know, no pressure, and you can obviously change your mind about anything, but we are starting to come up on classic reading time fall weather.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're not quite there when we were recording this, but you've mentioned, you know, maybe I'll try and read that one this year around the holidays, or this year, you know, at that time of year. Have you started to settle in on anything? You've got your eyes on anything?
I've got my eyes on everything, but I still think I'm leaning towards Don Quixote,
Yeah.
because that one is, as I've mentioned, just is one that's really at or near the top of my list. But I would say the Brothers Karamazov is the other one. It would probably be one of those two. But then the more I think about it, it gets dangerous, because then I'm like, yeah, but Dickens is so good around the holidays, and I've never tried Trollope, and it goes down that road pretty quickly. But yeah, I would
Well,
say those. Oh, go ahead.
As you say, you have the great ability to at least do something, though. I become paralyzed by that and don't do anything. Like I've got, I'm going to read one of these three books. Which one? And then the time passes, and it turns out I didn't read any of them because I couldn't make a decision. But I've never. I mean, maybe I'm, looking at your life and always seeing your accomplishments. Maybe you feel that way too, to an extent. But
Right.
That's something that I've always found impressive, is that you may not know right now what you're going to do, but I definitely have faith you're going to pick one and do it.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you. No, I just don't tell you about all the ones that I paralyze myself with. No, I know what you mean. It definitely happens both ways. But yeah, I don't know. I think it is something where, once I get my sights set on it, often I'll move it over to a pile next to the bedside table and just kind of have it sitting there, like,
yeah,
where I can't forget about it. So yeah, I'll update you as we go forward. But those are the two that are kind of calling to me. Do you have anything that you're thinking about?
I haven't yet. I need to do that. I do, but I'm not quite. I haven't done that. Honestly, I kind of consider this, again, this shows where my mind has been. I feel like I'm doing something like that by finally dipping into this Mistborn trilogy, because they're each like 700 pages, and it feels like we're recording this at the very end of July, and it's kind of like, great, just have some fun reading at the end of summer.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like I'm enmeshed in that right now, but I do want to pick some books that I'll be focused on for the fall weather and for the holidays. So
yeah, no, absolutely.
I'm sure we'll do an episode in the next little bit about specifics on that.
I think we should. Absolutely. Yeah. You want me to jump over to my second one?
Yeah, go ahead.
So the second one I picked is called Yellow Lighted Bookshop, A Memoir, a History by Lewis Busby. So again, I don't remember a lot of these. I don't remember how I came across them. I'm guessing it was either recommendations online or, again, a search looking for just these types of books, because I really do enjoy them. So this one, from the blurb, I'll just give a little bit. It says it celebrates the unique experience of the bookstore, the smell and touch of books, the joy of getting lost in the deep canyons of shelves, and the silent community of readers. So it is definitely a memoir and a history. I mean, it's an accurate description. So Busby, he talks about his time. He worked for years in the book business, starting as a teenage clerk at a bookshop that's now no longer around. So there's kind of that, elegiac, bookstores. This was written probably in the early 2000s. So I think there was a lot of concern at that time about the impact of digital books and, the big booksellers and Amazon and all that, which some of that's still true to this day. So there's a lot of that mixed in. But yeah, he came from a family that kind of only had, unlike Fadiman, it only had a mild interest in books. He talks like about Reader's Digest condensed books up on the shelves and that type of thing. But then it talks about how he started, through high school and other things, like starting to develop that passion for books and growing up and learning all the different parts of it. But then in addition to the memoir, he also mixes in, some history of books and libraries and bookstores. So, he talks about the Great Library at Alexandria and the printing press and, the coffee house, the role of coffee in books. So it's a really interesting blend. I liked it too because it talked a bit, you and I have talked in a recent episode about B. Dalton and Walden books. And he talks about the impact that those had on smaller bookstores. We have nostalgia for them, but at the time, to some extent, they were the Amazon that was kind of taking things over. So, it's kind of scattershot, but it's really, I keep seeing it described as gentle. And I think that's a really good description of this book. It's just very peaceful and interesting. I'm going to read just a quick little snippet here. So it says, the book is a uniquely durable object, one that can be fully enjoyed without being damaged. A book doesn't require fuel, food, or service. It isn't very messy and rarely makes noise. A book can be read over and over, then passed on to friends or resold at a garage sale. A book will not crash or freeze and will still work when filled with sand. Even if it falls into the bath, it can be dried out, ironed if necessary, and then finished. Should the spine of a book crack so badly the pages fall out, one simply has to gather them before the wind blows them away and wrap with a rubber band. So I really like that part. It just gives you an idea of kind of the tone of it. And then there's one more little section that I really like. It says, November, a dark, rainy Tuesday, late afternoon. This is my ideal time to be in a bookstore. The shortened light of the afternoon and the idleness and hush of the hour gather everything close, the shelves and the books, and the few other customers who graze, head-bent, into the narrow aisles. There's a clerk at the counter who stares out the front window, taking a breath before the evening rush. I've come to find a book. And so I
like that a lot.
I do too. Yeah. So, that gives you a few little snippets of kind of the tone, but it's just, again, that contagious passion and just, I don't know. It's exactly what I think about when I'm thinking about, books about books. It's just that love that comes through the writing.
Awesome. Yeah. I've never heard of that one. But I really like the tone there. I've never been excited about a Tuesday in November either, but that really kind of hits the spot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it kind of captures that, just that the weather we were just kind of joking about with like the cloudy day, and it's kind of, getting dark outside, and it's just the perfect time for reading or book browsing. And so kindred spirit, I think, for sure.
Makes me want to go to a bookstore today.
I know, me too.
Well, we'll see. I might be able to swing that actually later on.
Sneak away. It's always a good idea.
All right. Well, the next one on my list, I want to see if you would know it by this name, because I didn't. It's The Surgeon of Crowthorne.
No, I don't know that.
Sound familiar?
It doesn't.
A tale of murder, madness, and the love of words. Is that starting to ring a bell?
Yeah, that does sound more familiar.
Well, how about this? This is how I read it. I never knew until I was looking up for this podcast that it was called that in England. But in America, it was published as The Professor and the Madman.
Ah.
A tale of murder, insanity, and the making of the Oxford English Dictionary.
Yeah, that's interesting.
This is by Simon Winchester, and it came out in 1998. I read it shortly thereafter, and I actually still have my copy of it. I don't necessarily do that all the time, especially with a book like this, a nonfiction book. I may eventually just be like, okay, I can pass it on to someone else. But I really had a lot of fun with this book, and I still dip into it every once in a while. I don't have any passages to share today because that's not why I dip into it for like any inspirational passages. It's just kind of fun to read the story of how the Oxford English Dictionary was created, and as it says here, the professor and the madman who were engaged in that. One of the central contributors was this, quote unquote madman, and it talks about the time period when the Oxford English Dictionary was being created. It talks about these people, so it goes into a lot. But it does go into words. It does go into figuring out what a word means and figuring out the best way to write that down and how to compile it for this massive project of trying to have a dictionary of everything. And how do you do something like that? Well, the Oxford English Dictionary is very famous for having done just that. And I love still going to the Oxford English Dictionary to look up a word and seeing where it came from. Not just where the roots came from, but how it was used the very first time we have any record of it being used in English, and seeing what it meant then. and how it's evolved over time to become what it is today. That just is so fun because you learn so much about language. It makes the word brighten up. It makes the word stand up and give it a little more body to me.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a fun book to introduce me to a lot of stuff in the about the creation of the Oxford English Dictionary. But I probably hadn't used it a ton at that time in my life, 1998.
Right.
But I certainly have appreciated it a lot since. So
yeah, that's a great choice, and I like that it touches on a lot of the books so far we've talked about are talking about kind of the the gentleness, we used that word a minute ago, or the kind of the good feelings around books and learning and language. But I like that one also has a little bit of the eccentricity, and maybe you could call it the madness of books and writing, because there's no denying that there's that aspect of it too, just that whole idea of whether it's the language or the books themselves, there's definitely some kind of mental illness, maybe a little strong, but we all have those, there's that passion that can also turn into more than passion.
I've not seen the film adaptation.
I haven't either.
Did you by any chance? Yeah, it came out a couple years ago. I've heard good things about it, but I'm guilty of the same thing that I've accused you of. I just enjoy the book too much to really care, about watching the movie.
Yeah.
So.
No, I think some of these things got to just stay sacred. So yeah, I don't blame you for that. No, that's a great one.
All right. So what is your next, your last of our three?
Yeah.
I'm not going to say top because I don't have any idea if that's how either of us thought about this. I didn't.
No, me neither. My last of the three that I chose today is called The Library at Night by Alberto Mangale. So the last one touched a little bit more on bookstores. This one focuses more on libraries, both personal libraries and just the idea of libraries in general. So, it's kind of a celebration of reading in libraries. It's basically, the book was inspired by the process of the author. He moved into this 15th century home in France. And so he's kind of creating and organizing his library. And so that's the frame of it. And there's a lot of sections. Some of my favorite sections were just about him at night, just like the title says, kind of roaming around and picking books randomly off the shelf, and just kind of the whimsical nature of what leads you from one book to another. And I loved some of those sections. But like the last book also, it does contain a fair amount of history mixed in, the history of the library as well. So it's, again, essays, 15 essays, I think it is. He mixes in all kinds of stuff. It's kind of a commonplace book, I guess you could say, where there's biographies mixed in, there's anecdotes, there's some close readings, there's even photographs in there. So it's just a really interesting collection, so again, kind of like that last one, like I said, he talks about, again, the library at Alexandria, but he also talks about, a lot of other places, China, Rome. He talks about how Google and the internet is starting to change things with kind of what you were just talking about with the OED and other things versus Googling it, and just how it makes it easier, but it also has these other impacts that we may not think about. So yeah, I mean, it's just kind of a catch-all, all kinds of interesting stuff. Again, if you don't mind, I'll just read a real quick passage.
Well,
go ahead.
While you do, can you hold it up so
Sure.
I can see the cover while you're... That just looks like a nice book to have and read. Okay,
sorry. Yeah, no, it's gorgeous. So it says, most of us neither shun books in veneration of literature, nor shun literature in veneration of books. Our craft is more modest. We pick our way down endless library shelves, choosing this or that volume for no discernible reason. Because of a cover, a title, a name. Because of something someone said or didn't say. Because of a hunch, a whim, a mistake. Because we think we may find in this book a particular tale or character or detail. Because we believe it was written for us. Because we believe it was written for everyone except us, and we want to find out why we've been excluded. Because we want to learn, or laugh, or lose ourselves in oblivion. So, I don't know. To me, that's just, again, that sums up what I love about these kind of books.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I don't know very much about Alberto Mangale, but before we logged in here, I looked up on YouTube just to see how to pronounce it so that we didn't butcher his name.
Yeah.
And it looks like he has a lot of lectures out there at like universities about Borges. And so I'm very intrigued by both that book you held up as well as to know what else he has to say about Borges, because I know that there are quite a few books about books that are focused on Borges, who himself wrote, we could certainly get into in a fiction books about books. We get to do a lot with Borges on that episode.
Yeah, absolutely. And he does talk about him in this book. It's been a while since I've read it, so I don't remember all the details, but I know he definitely gets into some of Borges's stories about libraries and, the never-ending libraries and all those types of things too. So he also wrote a book a few years ago called Packing My Library. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that it is kind of a follow-up to this one where I think he has to move out of this house. And so it's kind of the reverse process. And if I remember right, it might even involve some culling of the library, which I'm intrigued by it, but it also sounds kind of sad because, I don't know if there's, if I'm interpreting it the way I think that I am, then I think it's more about kind of packing it up and moving and having to downsize the library, which I don't know if I want to read about that one, but.
Yeah. Our local library has culls every year where they sell the books for 25 cents or whatever, and it's always kind of sad, but I get it because it's very small. They really don't have the space if they want to keep bringing in new books. But sometimes I see there some of my all-time favorite books, and I'm thinking, oh, that's no longer going to just be available to anybody who wants to come to the library and get it.
I know.
As easily. Of course, books are also more readily available than ever.
No, they are. But I know what you mean. And seeing all these books that are like, you think about all the worlds that are in there and all the knowledge and all these other things, and you see them just sitting in a cardboard box for 25 cents. And it's like, I definitely have some existential moments when I'm looking at things like that. Probably go too far, but it's like, yeah, I don't know.
We'll have to talk about book culling of our own someday.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do engage in that. I feel like it's a cleansing up. It's a little bit cleansing for me, but
yeah, it is cleansing and sometimes just necessary. If I want to bring in more books, I got to figure out somewhere to put them.
Yep.
How about you? What's your last one?
Well, I did kind of put my number one. I said I didn't, but as I was talking about these, I saved the one that I wanted to highlight maybe the most for number one. I've talked about it before because it meant such a lot to me when I listened to it, because I listened to the author read it. I've recommended it before. It's Andy Miller's The Year of Reading Dangerously: How 50 Great Books and 2 Not So Great Ones Saved My Life. I don't think he's being too hyperbolic in that title. But the way I'm not saying he would have died otherwise, but I think that he's talking about this reinvigoration, because at the beginning of the book, he talks about a time in his life where it was busy. It was too busy. He wasn't reading, and how that was weighing him down, and finally putting together that list of betterment, that he calls it, of 50 books that he was like, I'm going to finally read these. I'm going to do it. And then taking the time every day to do just that, to read one of these books until he finished the entire list. But the thing that I love about this book is it isn't just about, oh, I did it, and this was the next book I read. But it's really quite, well, for me, it was very deep in, you just talked about existential crises of book culling at the library. For me, this was the just a helpful, psychologically healing book that really did probably in many ways change my trajectory too. I was still reading a lot when I read it, and I love listening to backlists because their enthusiasm on there and their wealth of knowledge just really is inspirational. It brightens my day. I love that Andy Miller still posts his, in fact, there should be one today or tomorrow, his what books did I read this month, even though in general, I think that he also kind of hates it because people always are like, well, do you not do anything else?
I know.
Snarky. Those snarky comments. But I'm glad he does. I mean, I've never tell him, oh, please keep doing it for little old me. But I've encouraged him before and said, look, I get it. If you ever want to stop this, that's fine. But I find it inspirational, eye-opening, encouraging about living life, not just about, oh, what books did you read? And why didn't you have anything else? But just, doing all that. So there are many quotes that I could have, but here's kind of from the more depressing part of it. At the beginning, he says, hell is other people, said Jean-Paul Sartre. Don't take this the wrong way, but I think he means you. And then he talks about, in short, this was the period in which the phrase, you're never alone with a good book, started to sound less like a promise and more like a threat. Just figuring out how to still get this mind space to read is a big part of this. it kind of goes along here. You can see his attitude toward a lot of this, that it's something that resonates with me. Somebody once described the internet as a library where all the books have been taken off the shelves and dumped in the middle of the floor. Disorganization, however, is not the issue. The internet is the greatest library in the universe. Unfortunately, someone has removed all the no talking signs.
That's really good.
So there's just something. I really did love this book. I still refer back to it quite often. It's very well written. Maybe those passages show that he's witty, and I would recommend listening to it. You could have a copy too, because he has little footnotes, but he's figured out a way to kind of put those in here. But it's just inspirational. I mean, we talked about it. I put together my own list of betterment. Barbara Pym's Excellent Women, the book that I'm reading right now that I quoted at the beginning of the episode, is on my list of betterment. I'm not sure when I would have gotten to it had I not just sat down and said, it's time. Mm-hmm. It's time to do some of this stuff again. I can't wait for it anymore, And I've felt invigorated. I really have felt good. This podcast, in many ways, is part of that too. Maybe for both of us, but certainly for me, of keeping it in my life and enjoying these conversations. And yeah, I find it really uplifting.
Yeah.
And so anyway.
No, I agree. It's funny how even something that you love can eventually either lose its luster or start to feel like a chore, or you just forget all the things that you love about it. And so whether it's a book, whether it's a podcast, whether it's, sometimes, believe it or not, for me, it's Twitter. I mean, like, there's different things that can just remind you and get you passionate about this stuff again, and get you adding books to your TBR pile and pulling this dusty book off the shelf that you kind of forgot about, that somebody's just raving about. So yeah, I think all of that is kind of what makes the reading life so exciting, is those books will still be waiting for you, whether it's tomorrow or a year or 10 years down the road, and rediscovering them through something like Andy Miller's book, is one of my favorite things about it. So I read that one a while back. I got it from the library. It's been a few years, but every time you talk about it, it makes me want to go buy a copy and kind of just keep it on my shelf. I think I will.
Just to have it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely one that's worthwhile. And I'm curious. I wonder if he's already posted his books he read in July.
I know.
We'll have to see after.
I'm just like you. I understand his frustration with people, because just like anything, people can ruin anything on the internet. But I always hope that he sees the hundreds of other comments of people either posting their own, that he's inspired them to post it, or just the people saying, please keep doing this. It's the high point of my month. Because some people, I think, take it as like this pissing contest of like, oh, look what I did this month.
Yeah.
But I think for me and you, and probably for a lot of people that take it in the right spirit, it's not absolutely the opposite of that. It's just, here's what I read. Here's where I am in my life. Let's talk about it. Did you read this book? Did you like that book? And it starts all these conversations, and it gets people to buy books and talk about books. And to me, it's everything that I love about what social media can be, and read them.
Yeah. It's, and I get that people can feel that it's a contest, because you can feel like you're competing about how many books you read. But I can also understand people, just in my own life, I don't want to have this quota or this pressure to read multiple thousands of books a year. But it's never felt that way to me, these things. I don't think anyone that's doing them is really showing off so much as showing a sense of accomplishment and enthusiasm. And there are plenty of people who post, short stacks, because they're living lives. We all get that.
Oh, yeah.
Mine would be very short. Right. I read like Mistborn this month, That's a really long book.
Exactly.
But I'm proud of that still. It was fun. I actually don't post mine, because I haven't been posting on Twitter very much, though I love it. But yeah, I agree with you. It's a different thing. This can be, you can look at it that way, as a contest and a competition, and become discouraged by that. But I agree with you. The people who've done it, and I've never thought he's doing it that way. I take it as encouragement, and also just a sense of joy, because this is a time of life. This is my experience of the last month. Look how beautiful it was.
Exactly.
And I'm excited for the next one.
Well, and partially too, for me, I think all of us to some extent have, readers often are quiet, or they are isolated from other people who are like them, or at least they feel that way. And so I think one of the things I love the most about kind of book book social media is you realize that there's all these kindred spirits out there, and you get this passion and this geekiness and this, you don't have to apologize. You're just like, oh, have you read that book? It's so good. And, you can just share all of it. And so to me, it's kind of like this connection that through big chunks of our lives until the internet came around and social media, maybe some of us didn't have that. So yeah, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm with you though. He in particular is very inspiring. And I know that over in England in particular, their podcast has inspired like shelves at bookstores. Like they'll have backlisted shelves or displays, and it's
Mm-hmm.
reinvigorated a lot of people to pick up some of these books that are often forgotten about. So yeah.
Yeah, how beautiful can that be? So a few years ago, there was a group of women who were all in their, maybe 60s, 50s, 60s, who asked me if I would read some Shakespeare with them,
Oh, cool.
because they loved it when they were in school 40, 45 years ago, and never have they felt the ability or the time, or to get back to it, even though they wanted to. And we were, making plans to go to read the plays, but then to see where they were being put on around town or around the state. And we went to some of these
Oh,
things together. And I'll tell you what, that was beautiful, for so many reasons, because again, it was that just a spirit of encouragement of, hey, we're doing something we've been wanting to do, and we're doing it together. It's fun. It kind of fizzled out over one summer, but we did it for quite some time. We read quite a few plays together, some with better success than others, of
mm-hmm.
course. But I just love that sense of opening up. And you're right. The reason I bring this up is you said, you can see these lists and you can see, backlisted being inspirational because it's making people go and read something that they probably otherwise wouldn't have, and maybe they wouldn't be reading anything,
Mm-hmm.
And it's not to say that those are the most meaningful books. Those are the ones they should have read. They would have been reading trash otherwise. I think a lot of people wouldn't even be reading. It's kind of like I talked about earlier. There's so much choice out there. There's so much else to do. The internet's always a drag on mind space, and
Mm-hmm.
and is always a distraction. Not to mention just all the other things in life that this kind of stuff can inspire people to do something that's they find meaningful, together, and to communicate about it. It's wonderful.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
well, that was a little bit of a
All
tangent.
right.
Thanks, Andy
Yeah,
Miller,
exactly.
for that. So, all right. Well, do you have anything you want to kind of recommend today,
Yeah.
before we sign
I
off?
thought I would stay in our on our theme here, and there is a documentary called The Booksellers. I don't know if you've heard this one or seen it, but
Mm-mm.
I kept seeing it on the internet and finally found that it was streaming, and I watched it. It's exploring the world of antiquarian and rare book dealers. So it's adjacent to this. It's fascinating. It's very it's mostly in New York. It focuses on the Argosy bookstore. There's one about Christie's, like auctions of rare books, and then it talks a little bit about the Strand as well. Um, so,
Huh.
it's really interesting. I do have some reservations. I mean, it's not exactly what we're talking about today. I mean, there's a little bit of the book passion of readers, but a lot of it is more the book as object because they're antiquarian and rare booksellers.
Hmm.
But it's really fascinating. Just really quick, I'll read. It says it's told by eccentrics you've never heard of but will enjoy meeting, dandies in tweeds and bow ties, pear-shaped nerds with sloping shoulders. All manner of Dickensian oddballs are as well represented here as you might expect from this arcane enterprise. So, it's just all of these. They're not all eccentric, but many of them are eccentric. But
I
yeah,
do like that.
yeah, exactly. So it's just, for a book lover, it's definitely one I would check out. Like I said, it does get a little bit more into, chasing these obscure books or these valuable books, which I don't care as much about, but it's still really a good movie worth watching, a good documentary.
That's actually, I mean, I will check that out, because I find that I love watching people who are enthusiastic about something,
Mm-hmm.
especially if it's somewhat related to me. I'm with you. That's not something that drags me to bookstores or to used bookstores. I, I've never caught that bug by any means. I do like on Instagram sometimes seeing some of those where they have like a really old beautiful hardback edition of a book. I can see the joy in finding that, and but I myself am like, well, I'd have a hard time reading that.
I know. White
So it's
gloves.
just a different kind of kind of joy in book collecting. I'm definitely a book collector. I know I'm not going to read all these in my lifetime, and I'll keep on getting them, and I like to see them on shelves. I'm definitely a book collector, but yeah, not one for looking at the antiquarian stuff. But that sounds fun. I love the description of Dickensian characters. That just brought to mind all those illustrations in his books of these, weirdly shaped people.
Exactly. No, there is definitely a little bit of that. It's a fun movie, fun documentary, and really good. I would recommend it for sure. How about you?
Well, so my recommendation this week is YouTube. It's Simon Savage.
Mm-hmm.
I've known Simon for many years. I've done some podcasting with him in the past, and he doesn't need my imprimatur or my recommendation. He's got a lot of people who I think know where he is on Twitter and on YouTube and on Instagram. But I love his YouTube channel. I love his book talks, and he goes on for a while about books that he's wanting to read or has read. It's not just book reviews, and they're actually sometimes fairly long. But I also love his vlogs, his reading vlogs, where he takes maybe a week and he's been filming, a walk that he's gone on, and then he films him pulling out a book to read, and then he films him with his husband cooking in the background, doing a little dance. I mean, I love watching those two. Chris is also just a joy to follow online. Mm-hmm. His cooking stuff and his, they go on these hikes and they explore and they do these fun things together. And then there's the comfort of reading within all of that. It just makes me feel at peace. Mm-hmm. It makes me look to how to dig out those moments in my own life and help others to feel that peace, hopefully for me to an extent, both in my own home as well as online. How can I be a source of just, hey, let's be kind. Let's enjoy what we're given. Mm-hmm. And I get that from Simon's page. I'm not sure if that's even what he would intend or anything like that. He might be like, what? That's not me at all. I'm quite sassy, and he can be sassy, but I get the other part of it, which is just again, the enthusiasm, this excitement, and being able to find nice ways to share it with people. I benefit from it. So I'd recommend Simon's YouTube channel. I think it's just Savage Reads, or maybe it's Simon Savage.
Yeah.
That would be mine for today, because again, just so much about books, and he'll show his bookshelves and he'll talk about them, and he'll talk about book culling. Like, I have to take some of these away now because I've got some new ones in, and it's just fun. It's fun. It's a lot about books. So
yeah, I need to revisit that one. I've seen some of his older videos, but I have not seen some of the more recent ones with him and his husband. So I need to definitely check that out.
Yeah, they're fun. They're just slices of life. I'm like, I think that would be fun to do this. I don't know if I'm not really one that I would want to share it with other people. Not because I think people shouldn't,
right?
But not my personality. Maybe, I don't know what it is, but it makes me want to have and to document in some way these moments with my family.
Absolutely.
It makes me want to not just sit around, but figure out, what are we doing today?
Yeah.
Whether it's in the home, watching a movie even. I'm not saying that's valueless. That's part of all of this, but it's being kind of deliberate about it, and then having a way to document it, to look back and say, yes, there's a lot of junk going on, and life is hard, and I've been having a hard week, but look at this stuff. Mm-hmm. I managed to find these moments with other people. So
yeah, sounds great.
But well, and I enjoyed this conversation today, Paul, as always. I don't know what we'll be doing next time. We've got some plans for sure, and we've got a lot of things on the docket, but I'm looking forward to it already.
Yeah, I am too. Yeah, thanks as always. It's a blast.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Mooks and the Gripes podcast. You can follow the Mooks and the Gripes and get show notes and book and film reviews at mooksandgripes.com. On Twitter, you can follow Trevor at Mooks and Paul at BiblioPaul. You can also get information about future shows on our Patreon. If you'd like to donate to the show, anything and everything, even $1 a month helps and is deeply appreciated. You can become a Patreon at patreon.com/mooks. Until next time.